This video is made possible by Practical Defense Systems, the best online security training at the lowest prices. You can start your security career today online at pdsclasses.com. Check them out. Hi, I'm Joel Persinger. I'm the Gun Guy. Thank you for all of your support of GunGuyTV. I'm very, very grateful for everything that you do. If you'd like to support further, you can join GunGuyTV Crew at GunGuyTVCrew.com, or you can find it on both Patreon and Locals. Also, check out these additional places where the show is posted, because sometimes YouTube can be a little sketchy. All right, today's interview is with Cam Edwards, one of my favorite people on the planet. I always look forward to having Cam on the show. We're going to talk about a wide range of things. He has a view into many, many places that I do not. And so without further ado, let's go talk to Cam. Cam, thank you very much for joining me. I really do appreciate it, man. I know that your time is busy and you're you're going as crazy as we are over here. But I really appreciate you coming on the show for a few reasons, not least of which is that this is not my I run a business and I'm teaching all the time, so I don't really have my finger on the pulse of what's going on with the Second Amendment fight nationally like you do. I kind of keep up on California. I try to keep up on Arizona because I have property there. But as far as the rest of the world is concerned, I can get kind of lost, and you don't. So I guess my first question would be, as you look at what's going on with the Second Amendment fight right now, what's going on across the country in the various states? Anything good? Anything bad?
A little of both, I think. Listen, first of all, thanks as always for the invite. I love getting a chance to hang out and spend time with you. And so I'm always glad when we say, hey, can you come on the show? So yeah, I'm glad to be here.
You can invite yourself. You know that, right? So you don't need to wait for an invitation from me.
Well, now that I know that, okay, good to know.
You can just invite yourself anytime. That's right.
And
all right, so what's...
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know if I'm just getting older or if there's just more going on, but I'm having trouble keeping up with everything going on around the country right now.
Yeah, you're ahead of me.
Between the legislation and the litigation and the regulation. So, I mean, we could talk about the good stuff, right? We saw, it has been a few months, but, we saw Nebraska pass permitless carry. That law took effect a couple of weeks ago. Some of the good news is really, it's not great news because we're on the defense, but we're winning on defense. So in Massachusetts, for example, this, I don't know, you've talked about HG 4420, I'm sure. Gun owners actually calls this the Lawful Citizens Imprisonment Act, and it's this 140-page pile of garbage that just obliterates the right to keep and bear arms. And the Democrats tried to rush this through before they broke for the August recess, and there was so much opposition not only from gun owners but from police chiefs and rank and file officers that they were really set back on their heels. And now apparently the House is drafting or trying to amend this hot garbage, behind closed doors. The Senate is working on their own bill. We don't know what that's going to look like, but it's nice to see anti-gunners on the defense themselves now in, a blue state like Massachusetts. So I'd say that's one area where we've seen some success. We've got this special session going on in Tennessee right now, and this was called by Governor Bill Lee after the Covenant School shooting in Nashville back in April. And this, to me, Joel, is just one of the most confounding things that I've seen. I don't know why Bill Lee called this special session to begin with. He floated this version of a red flag law. He calls it a temporary mental health order of protection. It immediately just face planted. Leadership in both the House and the Senate said, yeah, not interested. But Lee moved ahead and brought lawmakers back to Nashville. And he laid out these parameters, right? So, to try to throw Republicans a bone, we're not going to talk about gun control bills. Well, all that did was tick off Democrats. And since the gun control activists, they've been showing up there protesting, and it's just provided a platform for gun control activists all week long. The Senate passed 3 bills, only one of which had to do with firearms. It repealed the state sales tax on gun safes, said anybody who wants a gun lock in Tennessee can get one free of charge. And they basically said, we're done, right? We've passed all the bills we're going to pass. The House, meanwhile, is still working through dozens of bills. They're extending the special session a second week. And I can't understand why, Joel, because all this is doing is providing the anti-gunners a platform to pontificate about the supposed need for these laws, to bash Republicans for caring more about guns than kids. And I mean, it was political malpractice on the part of Governor Lee to call this special session in the first place. But for the House to drag this out, I'm just gobsmacked at what they're doing here. This is really frustrating because, again, they're on the defense. And every day the news media in Nashville is talking about these, moms who are being removed from committee hearings because they're holding up signs. I mean, the optics just look horrible. And I'm not convinced that we're really going to get anything of substance out of this special session. Gun owners are probably not going to be impacted by what comes out of this, but I don't know that there's going to be much positive coming out of this either.
I wonder how much of this is driven by donors, because some of these decisions that these people make to an average person, which I think I am, don't make any sense whatsoever. In fact, if I could say that they make no sense, that would be a bit of an understatement. So what you're describing to me is the usual nonsense. I mean, it's astounding. So I don't know, are they trying to raise money? Are they just colossally stupid? Well, they are politicians. Never mind. I'm sorry. I'm asking a leading question. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
From Governor Lee's perspective, I think it's personal. He lost a close friend in the Covenant School shooting. I think that his desire to bring lawmakers back was less about the donors and more about a personal reaction to this tragedy. As for why House Republicans are dragging this out, I've got no clue. And maybe they're trying to fundraise off of this. I don't know. But the gun control groups are fundraising off of this, too. Democrats are fundraising off of this, right? They're proclaiming that the Republicans are doing nothing. So it doesn't matter if they pass a bill dealing with mental health, if they pass a bill that's, meant to address juvenile crime. As long as it's not going after law-abiding gun owners, the media narrative is going to be, Republicans sided with the gun lobby over school children. And why on earth House Republicans would want to give them that gift is just beyond me.
So that's the other interesting thing. You said we're on defense, but we're winning on defense. What I find fascinating about that statement is how hard some judges are working to try to find some wiggle room around the Bruen decision so that they can get away from that simple, if the plain text of the amendment covers the conduct in question, it's presumptively constitutional, by somehow going back to some interest balancing test. They don't want to call it rational basis or, any of these things. But it's just interesting. There was a case that we had oral argument in the Boland case, Boland and what's the other one here in San Diego. One of the judges was just how she didn't hurt herself physically, trying to twist herself into a knot to come up with some way in which she could rationalize giving the government the case. It's astounding to watch. So in a very real sense,
it is.
Yeah, we are kind of on defense, but at the same time, they're kind of on defense. So it's this sort of weird, strange dynamic I haven't seen before in our Second Amendment fight. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting because you're right. I didn't have the opportunity to watch the oral arguments, and I think Reno was the other case. And
yeah,
Boland.
It is Reno, right? Exactly. Yeah.
But I spoke with Chuck Michelle. I know you did as well. And he, too, thought that that judge was not only overtly hostile to the plaintiff's position, but, really monopolized the oral arguments, trying to box in the plaintiffs here. And as you say, she's not the only judge, right? We've seen, I think it was Judge Janet Bond Arterton in Connecticut, who threw out a challenge to the state's ban on so-called assault weapons and large capacity magazines by declaring that they were unusually dangerous and not protected by the Second Amendment. In fact, she said the only guns that are protected by the Second Amendment are those that are in common use specifically for self-defense. The Supreme Court has said that arms that are in common use are presumptively constitutional, but she narrowed that down to the point that, your Glock might be protected by the Second Amendment, but your deer rifle, your over-under shotgun might not be, which is, again, a very weird ruling.
Talk about twisting it, it's on its head. It doesn't make any sense.
Absolutely.
Right? It's like, what the heck?
But just like you said, they're playing defense. And the good news for us is when they're trying to play defense in the courts, they are coming up with these ridiculous conclusions, right? They're I think it was the judge in Oregon who said that the magazine ban was okay because the historical analog, or at least one of them that she found, was a Illinois law barring paramilitary groups from parading around. And that's
right.
close enough to a ban on magazines, right? I mean, and again, this is the warped logic that they're presenting to the courts. And so I think that it does give us a leg up, certainly not at the trial court level. And depending on what court of appeals you're talking about, maybe not even there. But if the Supreme Court is no longer reluctant to take Second Amendment cases,
which it appears not to be. I mean, they took they took Rahimi, which, I mean, Rahimi's not a good guy, right? But they took the case, and Rahimi's I think there's some opportunities. What was that?
I think there's some. I said Rahimi's not even a great case.
No,
it's not the next case I would have wanted to see the Supreme Court take, but it does indicate, and I think part of it was the government appealing that decision to the Supreme Court. There's a part of me that is very cynical in thinking that the Supreme Court wants to throw gun control activists a bone after, the opinions in Heller and McDonald and Bruin. And maybe this is a way to say, look, we said longstanding gun laws are presumptively constitutional. Yes, this one is. I hope not, too. And if they
but you know what,
decide that
Cam,
that's what they're going to do, I hope
you,
to God it's written so narrowly that it applies to Rahimi himself and no one else.
Well, I agree. I got to tell you, I think, and I'm sorry I interrupted, I apologize, but just about the time, it's just been my experience. Maybe I'm just because I'm an old man and I'm an official senior citizen or something, but just about the time you think you have the Supreme Court figured out, you don't. And so it's going your way. I mean, the thing about the Supreme Court is it's going your way until it's not. And the names don't necessarily have to change for that to happen. I can't tell you the number of justices who ended up on the bench that I thought, okay, they're going to go this way or that way or the other way, and then sometimes they end up being precisely the opposite. So when you're looking at Amy Coney Barrett right now, she's becoming a little bit of an unknown, not quite as much as Roberts, but I mean, it's a little sketchy sometimes, depending on the direction she goes. So I hope you're wrong, but I've been kind of feeling a little bit the same way, so I totally get it. One thing, though, as I see with all these states coming up with all these laws, I mean, they're just throwing everything at the wall, it seems like, some of these blue states. Mm-hmm. You've hunted, I've hunted. I recognize the last gasp of an animal that's trying to fight its way into life at that last moment. You kind of want to be careful approaching the hog after you shot it to make sure it's dead before you wander up there and get hurt. Do you see this as the last gasp of gun control in some of these states, their last little bit of fight? Or are we in this for the long haul to fight this?
No. I wish
I was hoping for a better answer than that, but okay.
We win a couple more victories and they fold up their tent. Listen, this fight is going to continue for us, even after you and I are no longer drawing breath, which hopefully is decades from now. I would love to see the gun control movement consigned to the position of, the prohibition advocates. Nobody talks about the Anti-Saloon League anymore or the Women's Christian Temperance Union. And one day that may be the case for Everytown and Brady and Giffords.
What? Wait a minute. What are you talking about? I have an interview with them later on today. No, I'm sorry. Oh, well, anyway. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. I interrupted.
I know. But, the gun control groups have been, they've been pretty good at self-preservation, if nothing else. They've actually been pretty terrible at advancing their cause, right? I mean, if you look back in the 1960s and early 1970s, it was Handgun Control Incorporated. They were calling for bans on handguns. Yeah. Now gun control groups are or at least anti-gun judges are arguing, the only guns that are protected by the Second Amendment are handguns. They have not succeeded in turning this country into a giant gun-free zone. They have not succeeded in turning Americans off from exercising their right to keep and bear arms. But like I said, they're pretty good at self-preservation, right? They've stuck around. A lot of these groups have rebranded themselves. They've renamed themselves. Let's don't even call it gun control. Let's call it gun safety because that polls better. So they're always going to exist in some iteration. There's too much money behind these groups, if nothing else. But I think that we can push them to the margins. And I don't think that that's going to take decades. I think that over the next 10 years, through the courts, through the legislature, and honestly, through the court of public opinion, the idea that we can criminalize the exercise of a fundamental right and somehow eradicate gun violence is going to be seen as increasingly silly, particularly when the Democrats insist that they don't want to put people in prison, that they want to defund the police, that we need to look at, all of these measures to avoid incarceration while continuing to criminalize a fundamental right. I think that contradiction is going to become crystal clear to a lot of people who may still be confused and just buy into the idea that gun control is somehow about public safety.
Is our tent getting bigger? And the reason I asked the question is because you mentioned that they have not accomplished making the entire country a gun-free zone. They have not accomplished turning Americans away from their desire to exercise their Second Amendment God-given protected rights. And with all the stuff that happened during COVID, the shutdowns, the lockdowns, the defunding of the police, which you mentioned, the Antifa, civil unrest with Antifa and Black Lives Matter and all these other things, we saw millions and millions of new gun owners. And so it seems to me, just from being in California, that we're not the same sort of exclusive tent of the average old white guy anymore. Are you seeing our tent encompassing more groups and a broader selection of people?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've said for years that I think the Second Amendment community is the last big tent movement in this country, because it does cross political divides, it crosses racial divides, it crosses, socioeconomic divides. And you've got folks across the political spectrum who are gun owners. Now, I'd say that the tent's a little smaller when it comes to Second Amendment activism, but it too is getting bigger. I'm looking forward to the day where I hear a Democratic politician say, instead of "I'm a Second Amendment supporter," but they say "I'm a Second Amendment supporter and." I'm somewhat encouraged. I actually ran across a story earlier today. I think it was from the public radio station in Kansas City, Missouri. It was on the growing number of Black women who are becoming gun owners. And there's this group of women in Kansas City who put together a group kind of like a girl and a gun. They call it the Pretty Pistols Posse. And, every couple of weeks they get together and they go to the range and they're hanging out. And, again, they're across the political spectrum. Some of them are gun owners, but say we need more gun control laws. Some of them say I'm a gun owner and I think we need to prosecute violent criminals. But that tent is getting bigger, and it's great to see. The left, they always love to say, well, if more Black people own guns, that'll stop Republicans from supporting the Second Amendment. No, that's their bigotry on display. I going back to my days at NRA News, one of my catchphrases was "self-defense is a human right." And you don't have to vote like me, think like me, look like me, act like me for me to stand up for your right to keep and bear arms. And as long as that's our attitude in the 2A community, then yeah, I think not only are we going to have a bigger tent, but I think that we're going to have a more powerful voice in this debate.
You mentioned 2A activism, and you said that our tent may be shrinking there. What did you mean by that?
No, not shrinking, but a little bit growing. It's a little bit of a smaller tent. Because not every gun owner is a Second Amendment activist, right? I mean, we know that.
Right.
So I think that there are, I had hopes that, most of the new gun owners over the past couple of years would be more active and engaged. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily the case. I don't know that we've seen a huge expansion of Second Amendment activists. I think it's grown. But unfortunately, I think that there are a lot of people who say, well, I got my gun. And as long as I got my gun, I don't really care how difficult it is for my neighbor to get a gun when her ex-boyfriend is threatening her life. I don't care how easy it is or difficult it is for, my daughter to get a firearm. And so I think that we still have some work to do in terms of educating even gun owners about why some of these supposedly common sense gun laws are anything but, particularly when you've got groups like, 97%. Right. They're trying to be the voice of the common sense gun owner. Giffords has their AstroTurf gun owner group. So we can't ignore those gun owners who are not Second Amendment activists and who may not be absolutists when it comes to the Second Amendment. We've got to figure out a way to work with them. If we agree with them 80% of the time, we got to figure out a way to work with them 80% of the time and bring them over to our side so they're not serving as surrogates for gun control activists.
How does that change our strategy? I mean, we could talk about the tactic of this particular Second Amendment court case or that particular Second Amendment court case, or, fighting in this particular state legislature or whatever. But Sun Tzu said that tactics without strategy is just a noise before defeat. And so we have to have an overarching strategy somewhere, and I got to tell you, I'm not clear on what it is. Are you?
No, but I'm not sure where that overarching strategy would come from these days. I mean, the Second Amendment community is large, but it is diffuse. Right. There's you could argue in years past that, the NRA was the 800-pound gorilla in the room. But I don't think that you can say that the NRA is setting the strategy for Second Amendment advocacy right now. Groups like the Firearms Policy Coalition and Second Amendment Foundation primarily operate in the legal arena. And I'm not picking on any particular organization here, but I just don't think that we have one person or even a Jedi council of Second Amendment activists who are setting that strategy. I think we're kind of like herding cats right now. So my strategy, I mean, if I were in charge of the Second Amendment movement,
All right. Well, here you go. I dub thee for the moment of this conversation. You are the grand poobah of the Second Amendment movement. What would your strategy be?
My strategy would be to talk about this issue in a way that actually resonates with people. And, that's one of the things that the gun control groups do. They're very emotional in their appeals. And so we have to, as much as I love to cite statistics and as much as I think the stats and data are on our side, there's a time and a place for that. But I think we also have to acknowledge, the misdeeds that are done by people who own firearms. And then we have to explain why it is that laws that are meant to prevent anybody and everybody from owning firearms are not the answer. And, I think sometimes we gloss over that first part of you've lost somebody important to you. Your son or your daughter or your husband or your wife was murdered. And we instead say, well, because you believe that gun control is the answer, you must be a commie. You must be an authoritarian. You must be a totalitarian, right? We describe the worst motivations for these people. And I think that, part of it really is just showing our humanity, because the other side does want to portray us as people who care more about inanimate objects than flesh and blood human beings. And so we need to remind, I think, non-gun owners and the general public that the reason why most of us own guns primarily is to protect our loved ones and our own life, but to protect human beings. That's why we exercise our rights. And so when we can start from there, and, we can present these armed citizen stories, stories of people not only, protecting themselves, but others, I think that serves as a reminder. And then we can kind of shift to talking about the failures of gun control. California should be the safest state in the country. 2 years ago, they had the most active shooter incidents of any state in the nation. We just saw this mass shooting in Orange County, where a retired police officer, right, supposedly one of the good guys, goes and, starts shooting up a bar. Well, all of the gun laws in California didn't prevent that from happening. And yet we're told that this is exactly what's needed in order to stop these things. So if we can first start to, again, humanize ourselves and then talk about what really might work instead of these gun laws that are clearly not working. Even in the states with the most restrictive laws in the nation, they're not working. So what can we do? And that's where I think you can actually start to bridge some divides, because at that point, the conversation isn't about gun control. It's about mental health. It's about criminal justice reform. It's about all these other issues where you might be able to find allies that you didn't realize you had before.
When you were we were talking about new gun owners. A lot of those folks are new gun owners because they are afraid. They were afraid for their own safety, the safety of their families, the safety of their loved ones. Many of them come through classes with me, having never had a gun in their life. They bought it, they put it in a box, and they were afraid to take it out of the box because it's a totally new thing to them. And as a result, it's a new culture, new cultural experience. When they bought the gun, they didn't abandon their previous political beliefs. They didn't abandon their beliefs where gun control was concerned. A switch didn't go off in their heads that says, okay, I have a gun now, and so now I'm going to be a pro-Second Amendment activist. That part didn't occur. And I think for us to expect that it did is to have an unrealistic expectation of those folks. How do we then move the needle with those folks from ardently anti-gun, even now, I got mine, but you shouldn't have yours. How do we get them from there and move that needle over to at least some midway point where they recognize that the Second Amendment guaranteed right of Americans is a valuable thing and needs to be protected?
Okay, so I think that's a multi-part question. So I'm going to
There's like three of them in there, but you're a sharp guy, so I knew you'd get it.
So first of all, you're right. I do think that talking to a gun control institution or an organization with the idea that you're going to get them to change their mind is silly. The only time I think you would need to engage with the organizations is when you want a third party to pay attention to that dialogue that you're having, right? And social media is obviously a perfect example of this. When you're engaging with Giffords or Brady on social media, you're not trying to convince them that you're right. You're trying to convince everybody who's looking at that exchange that you're right. And so I think that that's different than talking to individuals. And, what I'm talking about isn't some, multi-million-dollar PR campaign. I'm talking about just talking to your friends and neighbors. When these issues come up, if it pops up on your Facebook feed and it's not, you sharing everything to the world, but you're having a discussion with the people that you associate with specifically on that platform. Then again, I think it does come back to pointing out the fallacies of in the false narrative that the gun control advocates present of gun owners. And maybe that is even, reminding them like, hey, when they say that, we care more about guns than kids, they're talking about you too. Even if you support universal background checks, their position is the Second Amendment does not protect an individual right to keep and bear arms. That's the gun control advocate's position, or the institutional position, right? Heller got it wrong. McDonald got it wrong. Supreme Court's wrong. You don't have the right. And as soon as we get the power, we're going to take that away from you. So when we can remind these gun owners who may embrace red flag laws or, magazine bans or things like that they're not stopping there. And maybe one way to do this, look, first of all, I'm not, I don't have all the answers, but one of the questions I've never heard answered by a gun control advocate who says, I support the Second Amendment, but I've never heard them explain or give an example of a gun control law that goes too far. And I don't think Shannon Watts can. I don't think Mike Bloomberg can. But I bet that a lot of those new gun owners who may still be, ardently anti-gun, I bet they could tell you in a conversation, well, I think a complete ban on firearms would go too far. Okay. Well, there's a starting point, right? That opens the door a crack. I suppose there might be some gun owners out there who say that even a complete ban on firearms, that's fine with me. Those folks are weird. Probably a waste of time to continue talking to them too, right? Yeah. But, for most people, they're not going to be Second Amendment absolutists, and they're not going to be complete gun prohibitionists. They're going to be somewhere on that spectrum. And so I think that does give us an opportunity to at least talk about, okay, well, what do you support? Why do you support it? Now, let me tell you about why you shouldn't. Let me tell you about the harms that are done, with a licensing scheme like you've got in California, where, some cities are charging $1,000 or more before you can get your concealed carry license. And all of these hoops and hurdles that you have to go through. There was a lawsuit just filed this week by the Second Amendment Foundation challenging Maryland's red flag law. And this is a great example, because red flag laws are one of those things a lot of people support, just kind of, knee-jerk reaction. Well, dangerous people should be able to get a hold of guns. And And this doesn't, permanently take away their guns. It just temporarily removes their guns, and they're dangerous. So this is a good thing. Well, in Maryland, this guy, decorated combat veteran, he's apparently been tangling with his county for like a couple of decades over, his grass is too high, just ticky-tack little stuff. Earlier this year, a county official filed an extreme risk protection order petition against him, claiming that he was a danger to others, that he had threatened county employees, including herself. The same day she files that petition, a judge holds an ex parte hearing. The subject of this petition, this combat veteran, is not allowed to participate. He doesn't even know it's taking place. Judge grants the emergency order. Later that day, deputies show up at his house. They not only confiscate his firearms, they take him away. They haul him off for a involuntary mental health evaluation. He's deemed to be, I can't remember what the diagnosis was, but it was not mentally ill. It was not, this guy needs to be locked up. He was released a short time later, but it was only 12 days later that he got his day in court. And he didn't even have the opportunity to provide evidence in his defense. He didn't have the opportunity to refute the testimony of this county official, because before that hearing got started, that official pulled her petition because she knew, apparently, that the truth was going to come out. And so, this guy was embarrassed in front of his neighbors. I had to answer all kinds of questions, to folks in the community. What happened to you? Why did they do this? Took him a while to get his guns back. And so, these types of abuses, look, wanting to make sure that dangerous people don't do dangerous things to themselves or others, that's fine. The question is, how do we go about that while respecting the rights of people who aren't dangerous, but who may be falsely accused of being dangerous? And a hearing in which you're not even allowed to present your side of the story before your guns are taken and you're hauled away to a mental health institution. I'd like to think that when we explain it that way, even to people who are, philosophically not opposed to red flag laws, say, well, that's some BS right there. That's not how things should go down.
And I agree with you. I think the tough part is getting that message across. I think
you're right.
A lot of what you've discussed,
got cases like this, it gives us the opportunity, No,
I agree with that. I'm talking more about from a practical communications means, because part of what you're talking about is being educated as to what's going on with a given issue. And unfortunately, we live in a world where media is not trying to educate people. Media is trying to indoctrinate people. Schools are not educating people. They're indoctrinating children. The Hollywood is not the education industry. It's the entertainment industry. I don't know how often I got to tell gun owners that. Don't learn about guns from what Hollywood does. They're trying to entertain you, that don't accept it as education. And then, you mentioned social media. Social media is a toxic place. And so if you venture forth with a point of view, there will be trolls coming from every corner to come and beat you up. I should know. I'm a YouTuber. Okay. I had to put up with that. The first rule of being an influencer, or whatever they call it, is don't feed the trolls. Okay. So you have to understand that you're going to take a beating, and if you don't have a thick skin, you're not going to get anywhere. So no matter where you turn for that information, you risk a painful experience or getting information which is, for lack of a better term, fake news or false, misleading information. And even the people who say, well, we want to correct this so that you don't get misleading information now, are actually getting rid of the truthful information so they can stuff misleading information down your throat. So how do we encourage, I guess, where can we encourage? I'm still looking for a way forward with these folks, these new gun owners, because, brother, I think these new gun owners are absolutely key to saving our country and saving our constitutionally protected rights, because there's so many of them, and in many ways they've been so misinformed about the right. Mm-hmm. And yet, I don't know that they'll watch GunGuy TV for fear that it's so harshly slanted one direction that they're not going to feel safe there. I don't know that they'll read Bearing Arms for the same reason. And so I don't know, how do we reach those people? How do I reach those people? How do you reach those people? I think a lot of times it's got to be their friends who reach them, but a lot of these people do not have friends who are gun owners unless they're friends who are gun owners just like them. Mm-hmm. And, we tend to connect together. I don't have an answer, and I'm not looking for you to give me one other than I'm curious what your thoughts are.
No, I think you're right. I mean, listen, for more than just the Second Amendment, this is a challenging time for us to talk with one another, which is crazy because it's easier than ever to do so. I mean, here you and I are talking thousands of miles away from one another, looking at each other and having this conversation. I guess it's easier to talk to people, but it's a lot harder to listen. Because there is so much coming at us every day, and you've got to decipher what's real and what's not. I have these conversations. My wife will never watch this, so I can say this, but don't anybody tell her that I said this. But I've had these conversations with her because we'll connect at the end of the day. We call it happy hour, and we have our drink after dinner, and we're kind of going over the big news of the day. And a lot of times, I'll have to say, hey, no, that's not actually the story, because all she's done is she's read the headline, and the headline is very misleading. And so you're right. It's hard. It's not easy, and I don't have the answer. But I've got a couple of suggestions, and one of them is to, again, have those face-to-face conversations as much as possible. And the gun owners, the new gun owners who are anti-gun but politically involved, I think are a different animal than the new gun owners who are apathetic about activism in general. And maybe gun ownership it's something that it's buying a gun is something that they did. Carrying a gun is something that they do on occasion, but they don't spend a lot of time thinking about the politics of this, right? That's an entirely different group of people. They're also, I think, maybe even harder to reach. Because the anti-gunners who own guns, or maybe the pro-gun control folks who own guns, who are politically active, they might not be watching this on a regular basis, but they're still going to get what we say filtered through the opposing view, right? Did you hear what Joel said? GunGuyTV said, blah, 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 right? It's those gun owners who,
and if you think that doesn't happen, you're wrong.
Oh, I know it
a lot. Right.
Absolutely. I mean, you got groups like Media Matters for America that are about nothing more than twisting what people like you and I have to say.
Yeah. That's all they do.
Exactly. I mean, that's their job. But it's those gun owners who could be allies, at least some of the time, if not all of the time, who just don't. This is not their thing. And maybe it's, they're just getting caught up on suits, or they're, engaged with their own family stuff. But they're not, Second Amendment issues are not on their radar. That's the group that I'd really love to figure out how to reach. And that's the group that I'm really struggling with, because I don't know how you reach out to those people who have simply no interest in this issue, even though they are exercising their Second Amendment right on a regular basis. Well,
and I'll tell you something. It's a sad but humorous anecdote. So when folks started rushing out to buy guns because of COVID and all the nonsense that was going on with the time with civil unrest and like that, many of them were people who had voted for gun restrictions, voted for politicians who pushed gun restrictions and so on. And so they would go down to buy a gun, and they'd say, wait a minute, what do you mean I have to wait 10 days? But I need it right now. What do you mean I need a background check to buy ammunition? But I need the ammunition. And so suddenly, these restrictions affected them. And I think that's where those folks get involved a little bit, is the day in which the things they voted for because it felt good at the time caused them pain. It's a strange thing. A buddy of mine, who's a former business partner of mine, used to say that the best lessons are learned through painful failure. And one hopes that these difficulties, these scary things that happen when people try to go buy guns and they can't, for whatever reason, maybe wakes them up a little bit. And perhaps we've already discussed it, but I'm curious what your thoughts are going forward, what is our greatest challenge right now in restoring the parts of our rights that have been taken away and protecting them in such a way that they can't be taken away again?
That's a big question because we've got a lot of challenges. And my answer would probably differ depending on what day of the week you ask me. But I've been talking a lot of lawsuits and litigation. So I'm going to say the biggest challenge that we face right now is getting the courts, including the Supreme Court, but primarily these lower courts, to actually acknowledge what the Supreme Court jurisprudence is when it comes to our right to keep and bear arms, so that we don't keep seeing these flagrant attempts at circumventing the Supreme Court or misreading Bruin to allow for all kinds of things that are clearly not permissible under the Constitution. Because when we don't have the courts, when you have the courts willing to twist the law, then it becomes, I think, more difficult for us to stop legislation, to stop these bad bills from becoming bad laws. It influences the court of public opinion because, members of the public said, well, look, this judge in Connecticut just said that AR-15s aren't protected by the Second Amendment. So, okay, they're not protected. It is difficult. I'd say one of the reasons why it's our biggest challenge is because we can't really lobby judges, right? It's difficult to reach those individuals, especially when you've got gun control groups that are now working in law schools. They've been pretty smart about this. We're a little behind the eight ball. University of Wyoming has its Firearms Research Center, which is a fantastic addition. But, you've got Johns Hopkins, you've got Duke. University of Minnesota Law School just started a clinic that's basically using their law school students to help promote these gun control lawsuits. We've got some great legal scholars on the pro 2A side, but I worry that, our bench is thin, or at least thinner than the anti-gun advocates. And, we don't have a lot of these white shoe law firms. I mean, if you look at the list of amicus briefs that have been filed in Rahimi and all of the, massive law firms that are doing pro bono work for gun control groups, we don't have that. Paul Clement won a case at the Supreme Court in Bruin, and his law firm told him when he got back, we don't want you taking any more Second Amendment cases. That's the legal environment in which we're operating right now. And unless we do something to change that, then 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now, it doesn't matter what the Supreme Court has said in Heller or Bruin, because you're going to have Supreme Court justices that are willing to overturn that case. So that is a very long answer for a very long question. But I think that is the biggest challenge that we face, But again, we've got challenges in the legislative arena. We've got challenges in the, regulatory arena. Within the court of public opinion. But ultimately, as long as we've got a functioning republic, the Supreme Court has the final say on what's constitutional or not. And unless we address this gap in the legal system and in the law schools, I worry that the deck is going to be increasingly stacked against us, even though we've got some great decisions coming out over the past few years.
It's an interesting thing to think about and kind of a frightening one at the same time. But circling back a little bit, I asked you earlier about what our strategy was. And I agree with you because the NRA arguably has become the 75-pound gorilla in the room at this point. They got so many things going on with them internally. And we really I don't see a cohesive strategy led by any one organization within the groups that are fighting for the Second Amendment. But you've just described a strategy on the part of anti-gunners, which is quite interesting. And I guess my question would be, do they have a cohesive strategy that you see? And if they do, who do you think is leading it?
So that is a really interesting question. Man, you have good questions. I think that they don't have. No, I don't think that they have a cohesive strategy. I think that there are at least two largely but not completely overlapping groups within the gun control lobby. So you've got the groups like Everytown and Brady Giffords And then you've got kind of smaller groups like I throw March for Our Lives in with the first group, but then you got like Change the Ref, Coalition to Stop Gun Violence. Some of these smaller groups, they've been more willing to criticize Joe Biden for not going far enough, and for trying to kind of push the envelope a little bit more. While the larger institutional gun control groups are at least publicly happy to have a seat at the table, and they praise Biden. They've already endorsed him for re-election next year. So there is a split, I think, within the gun control lobby about how hard to push and where in particular to push. One of the briefs, as I mentioned, that was filed in Rahimi was filed by a guy named, it's Jonathan Lowey's group. He used to be Brady's top lawyer. I can't remember what his group is now. It's like Global Community Against Violence or something like that. And his brief argues that the Supreme Court's just wrong when it comes to the right to keep and bear arms, right? He wants to relitigate Helen. That's not the focus of a lot of the amicus briefs coming from other groups, which are specifically talking about the domestic violence statute, things of that nature. So the strategy is different depending on what group it is that you're talking about in the gun control movement, but the goal is the same. Right. For all of these groups, the goal is a quote unquote gun free society. I don't think that there is a gun control outfit out there that is seriously okay with the idea that, yes, people have a right to keep and bear arms. That means that we have a right to carry a firearm for self-defense in public, in places like grocery stores and malls. I don't think that any of those groups would agree to that, even though that's pretty clearly what the text of the Second Amendment would say. So they have more message discipline. If we're like herding cats, they're maybe like herding calves, right? Not full grown docile cows, but at least in the same ballpark, right? And I think that I get the sense that at least publicly they. Well, actually, I take that back. I was going to say they play better with other groups, but I've actually been really impressed with the coordination and cooperation that we've seen from Second Amendment organizations over the past couple of years. So I'm going to rescind my my statement that I was going to say.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, the NRA, no matter what anybody that's watching may think about them one way or the other, that's for them to decide. But the NRA having the struggles that it's had, both internally and from pressure outside, I think has necessitated a lot of these other groups starting to work together, and I'm seeing them do that more. So if there's a positive to be seen from that, I think you've just described it, which is a lot of these organizations are working together where they weren't before. I don't know that translates into them having a cohesive strategy that everybody's a part of, but I think where they can work together, they do. And I've seen a lot of positive out of that. And so I think that's one good thing that we can talk about. The yesterday they had the Republican debate, presidential debate. I confess I didn't watch it. I've seen the snippets here and there. I actually watched the Trump interview with Tucker because I thought it would be more interesting. And it was very interesting, regardless of what you may think of Trump or not or whatever. I'm not going to get into that either. But there was an interesting question among many that Tucker asked him. He asked him, "Do you think we're headed towards civil war?" And I thought, wow, what a mic drop question that was. And immediately I thought, you and I were both in broadcasting. I'm thinking there's no program director in the world that would have allowed you to ask that question. that question was not going to get asked. But he could do it now. He's on this independent guy, ask what you want. And Trump hedged a bit, and then Tucker wasn't letting go of it. And so he asked the question in a slightly different way. And Trump made a comment. He said that there's a lot of passion. I think it was, to paraphrase, there's a lot of passion out there and a lot of hatred. And sometimes those can be a dangerous combination. And so I don't know if you see it, but I see it on social media a lot. People talking about civil war. I don't know whether they're just trolls or they're people who legitimately feel that way. And so I'll ask you, what do you see in that? Are we headed toward some violent revolution? or not?
I'm going to say not. I know that it feels that way. I think, again, part of that is social media, amplifying those voices. And, you talk about social media being a toxic place. And you're right. I posted on Twitter or X, I guess. I posted on X for the first time ever, now that I think about it. But I got on what the site formerly known as Twitter for the first time in probably 8 or 9 months last week. And it was some random tweet by Kamala Harris. And before I could think about it, it was like, blah, blah, blah. And I, vomited out my response and hit send. But I don't like social media. I have the same irrational hatred of social media that Shannon Watts has for AR-15s. The difference between Shannon Watts and myself is that I'm not trying to ban social media. I just don't get on it. Right. If Shannon Watts doesn't want to own an AR-15, great, she doesn't have to. But then she goes so far as to try to ban you and I from doing it. So I think social media is bad for us. I don't think that we were meant to be able to talk to everybody all the time.
It's also it's not properly named. It should be called anti-social media.
Yeah,
There's
really
nothing social about it. Okay?
Right.
That's just really bad.
And I'm gonna sound like the old man, get off my lawn. But I remember the early days of the internet. I remember the dial-up days. I met my wife online. I met my wife in the beta chat of what would become Yahoo Chat back in the late 1990s. And it was a much different experience because you're in a room with maybe 12 or 15 people, because that was all the bandwidth that they could handle at the time. So you were actually able to have real conversation. Now it's just this fire hose of information and opinion that's coming at you. And it's designed to hook you. It's designed to keep you there. And the easiest way, the mainstream media figured this out long ago, the easiest way to keep you engaged is to piss you off, to make you angry. It's to make you, and secondly, to make you feel sad, right? But to make you feel something. If you are feeling something, you're going to keep clicking. You're going to stay there. You're going to keep reading. And that may be good for media companies, but I think it's bad for us because it removes the ability to analyze and to take a step back and to think about situations from a 30,000 foot level. And that's also important when we're making decisions. So, the reason why I say that I don't think it's likely is because I don't think most people want a civil war. We may, Republicans may not like Democrats. Democrats may not like Republicans. But I don't think that most of us are ready to call America quits.
All right, last question, my friend, because I very seldom get to talk to you. What's going on with Cam Edwards and like that? So we got to talk about something happy. What's happening with you? Good things, I hope.
Well, yeah. Now that I know that I can invite myself onto the show, you're going to be talking about
anytime, man. Anytime. I missed seeing you at SHOT Show because you weren't there this time around, but maybe next time. You had something. You had more important things to do. That's for sure.
Well, as probably most of your audience knows, my wife has lung cancer. The good news is it's been 7 years since her diagnosis. 7 years. We found we call it Arnold because it's not a tumor, but it was a tumor. So she found the mass in her lung Memorial Day 7 years ago. So she's actually over 7 years.
Wow.
And she's doing great, all things considered. I mean, her doctor calls her a miracle. But, the immunotherapy drugs that she's on have kept the cancer in check. The tumors aren't really growing right now, but they've taken a toll on her. She can only do so many rounds before she just gets so weak that she's got to take a break. So she's in the middle of a break right now. But yeah, I haven't gone anywhere this year. It's become, and I'm glad that I am able to do this, and I'm glad that she's here for me to be able to do this. But she just doesn't have the strength to do a lot of stuff around the farm and around the house. So for me to leave for longer than like 4 hours is a kind of a major deal. So I missed SHOT Show, missed NRA. I'm not gonna be able to attend Gun Rights Policy Conference. I had to beg off of the Second Amendment Freedom Fest in Quincy, Massachusetts, but I'm able to do as much of this stuff virtually as I can. But again, every day is a blessing because 7 years ago, if you had told me that I still get to wake up next to her every day, and I'd still get to have happy hour with her every afternoon, I would not have believed you. And she's here. and she's, most days are good days for her. Our kids are doing well. We got a dog about, I guess, 8 months or so ago, a now nearly 100-pound Bernese Mountain Dog.
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, he's fun.
That's not a dog. That's a dog.
That's a dog.
That's
yes.
a dog. I love it.
Yes. And, it's been fun. I had a chance to go shoot clays with John Petrolino and Charlie Cook. They came down and took me out of the house for an afternoon a couple of weeks ago. So that was great.
Good for them.
I'm just, look, it's easy to be angry these days. There's a lot of stuff to legitimately be angry about besides just, random idiots on the internet. But I do try to take a little bit of every day. I try to find something that I can look to and say, thank you, God. I always have my wife. I always have my family. Some days it might be a sunset. Some days it might be, the fact that I get to talk with a friend like you. But if we look for those good things in our life, I think they're there to be found as well. And I think that can help center you. So yeah, that's what's going on with me. Primarily, it's my family. I mean, they are my primary focus right now. And I'm glad to say that they call me I'm their emotional support human. That's my nickname around the house. And and I'm glad that I can do that for them. So yeah, that's what's going on in my world.
Well, that's awesome. And see, now that is a happy way to end the show.
It is a happy ending.
Cap, thank you very much, brother, for coming on the show. I really do appreciate it. I've looked forward to chatting with you. And you got to invite yourself back now. You have the invitation. It's open, right? All you do is text me, shoot me a note, whatever. Hey, Joel. Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. I look forward to it.
I'll be doing that again very soon. Thanks, Joel.
All right, brother. Take care. Thank you very much for watching the entire interview. I'm very, very grateful. Have a wonderful week. And please support GunGuyTV if you would. I would really appreciate it. You can do that at GunGuyTVCrew.com. Make sure you're reading Bearing Arms. Make sure you're watching Cam and Company. Cam's a great guy. I really appreciate all the hard work he does. And you should support him if you're not already doing so. Again, thank you for watching. Have a great week. And wherever you go, whatever you do, stay safe.